Good morning. Good morning and welcome to the worship service of the Unitarian Universalist Church in Idaho Falls. My name is Arthur Kuhl, today's worship associate. This morning, we bid you welcome. Come with a weary spirit seeking rest, who come with troubles that are too much, come afraid, hurt. Bid you welcome. Come with hope, heart. Have found here room for your spirit. Whoever you are, wherever you are on your journey, we bid you welcome. Hope that here you will experience this service as a moment that inspires you. Find a message that transforms you. The caring and loving community that gives meaning to life. I have one announcement. That is that we're trying to rename the Jefferson. So there are suggestions that you can make at last Sunday. And there is a box next to the piano there where you can drop a piece of paper with your suggestions. Or you can tell Elizabeth Gatti with your suggestion. Your email is dree@idahofallsuu.org. Also note that if you have joys, turns, sorrows, and milestones that have affected your life recently and that you would like to share with the congregation, you can do so by filling out a slip of paper you'll find at the entrance of the sanctuary. Or if you're joining us virtually, by posting them in a chat box, right? Thank you. Today we'll not have a dedicated time for an offering, but encourage you to strengthen the church by making a contribution, either by dropping your contribution at the entrance of the sanctuary, or by emailing or mailing a check to the church at P.O. Box 50376, Falls, Idaho 405, or by going to the church's website, idahofallsuu.org. The connections, click on the donate button to get to the contribution. Thank you. I invite you now to enter into the spirit of worship with the following words. May we be reminded in this place of our highest aspirations, inspired to bring our love and service to alter humanity. May we know once again we are not isolated beings. Mystery, miracle, community. Please join me in reading the Church's covenant printed for those. Love is the spirit of community, service, law. This is our great covenant. Dwell together in peace, seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Now light the flaming chalice, symbol of our faith, illuminate today with Reverend Christine. Gather this hour as people with joy, sorrows, gifts. Light the beacon of hope, sign of our celebration, life shared together.
Good morning. Our service today focuses on the spirituality of one of America's greatest conservationists, John Muir. But with the dangerous situation in Ukraine, I felt it was important that we acknowledge what is happening there. So I will begin with a peacemaking prayer for Ukraine, and I changed our opening hymn, 18, "We Would Be One," to express our solidarity with Ukraine. A peacemaking prayer for Ukraine, adapted from Reverend Eric Cherry. The history is complex, politics tense. The fear and anger are overwhelming. The future is clear. But glimpses of a hopeful vision not be bombed, oblivion, anyone. Prayer, we call to mind the neighbors of differing faiths, with different histories, different politics, with different emotions. To find room for each other, hearts, dreams, their lives. Those who hold firmly the vision of peace and justice anywhere in the world, but especially today in Ukraine. Spirit of life and love be present, all who are suffering terribly violence in Ukraine. Lift up the hearts of those who fear and inspire courage among the people. Be present with political leaders, ensuring a retreat from violence, session toward the peace table. Guide the hands of all those caring for the injured, hungry, and the grieving. And open our hearts, passion. Remind us our complicity, ability, and lead us toward generous engagement. Move us always vision of peace. Please join now in a moment of silent prayer and meditation. Praying. And before we continue today's service, I feel obligated to make two more acknowledgments. First, I would like to do a land acknowledgement. We should acknowledge that the land we now live, work, and worship on was once the land of the Shoshone-Bannock people, as well as the hunting grounds of other Native American tribes and their ancestors who inhabited the region for tens, thousands of years before us, back to the Paleolithic hunters who followed their game animals from Asia and America. Second, I think we must acknowledge the controversial character of John Muir, perfect human being. A land acknowledgement today is especially important because Muir has been criticized by some modern historians for promoting the ideal of a pristine American wilderness that ignored the presence of those who were already here before European civilization, as well as his sometimes disdainful remarks about the Native Americans he encountered in his travels. That said, I don't think he was an exceptional example of the bigotry of those times, just an unfortunate example of the endemic racism in America in general. The Sierra Club, of which I have long been a member, is wrestling with this legacy in what I believe is a constructive way. And the same can be said John James Audubon and his legacy, Audubon Society. We must be honest about such notable people, but we must be cautious too about judging them too harshly by 21st century ideals, especially and in practice, such ideals are often ignored today. I would be glad to discuss these topics with anyone at a later time, but my service today will be an exploration of Muir's spiritual search for meaning and how we might find it our own inspiration. I now invite you to enjoy our opening hymn for 318, Would Be One.
We would be one as now we join in singing our hymn of love to pledge ourselves anew to that high cause of greater understanding of who we are and what in us is true. We would be one in living for each other to show to all a new community. We would be one in building for tomorrow a nobler world than we have known today. We would be one in searching for that meaning which binds our hearts and points us on our way. As one we pledge ourselves to greater service with love and justice, strive to make us free.
Back to John.
Now dedicate time to our joys, concerns, sorrows, and milestones. Time to share with this religious community events that have affected your life, recent past, those. I have several morning. One from Devet, Gart. I'm grateful that my mom is here, spirituality, respect. One from Catherine Giovanna. My thoughts are with my nieces, Lauren Jude Winscote, and Elizabeth Reed, were with their mother, Winscote, passed away the morning. I have a concern from Leila Chambers. Also remember Russians are protesting in support of the from Karen Schaefer. After a COVID scare, we enjoyed a winter break, backyard, office park, canyon, Cargie, with our sons, Warren from Eric from one grand, Gabriel. Happy. That has got to spend time with family last weekend. Found out I have spinal stenosis. Pretty sad about it. Yes, it's more of a concern also. Nancy Frank has a concern. Danny Arzo Manyan, favorite Lebanese student, hardest information technology student ever had, went to grad school in Ukraine. So worried about it. Victoria has. My brother is suffering from 1 year ago, waiting for an MRI March 3rd, hopefully. We light one last candle, lift up these joys and concerns, as well as the ones remain in the silence.
Our reading this morning is from the introduction to the book, John Muir's Spiritual Writings, Cinders. The South Tyrolean alpinist Reinhold Messner, climber extraordinaire, first solo without oxygen, was once asked by an American tourist, alarmed at the blight of resorts, spas, and tourist attractions that littered the European Alps, why they had suffered so much more commercialization than the mountains of the West. You had Muir, replied. Messner did not elaborate, nor did he need to. Most of the Western world knows John Muir as the founder of the environmental movement, 19th century mountaineer and writer whose articles and political advocacy during the last decades of the 19th century galvanized Americans to begin to conserve their rapidly vanishing wilderness. With little more than his pen and an inexhaustible passion for the wild, Muir led the way in reversing industrialized West's exploitation of nature. In 1892, Muir helped found the Sierra Club to advance the cause of nature conservation, the first of its kind. And since that time, millions of acres of America's wetlands, forests, deserts, and high mountains have been set aside for the enjoyment, health, and decidedly for Muir, the spiritual well-being of the American people. Muir was emphatic about the sacred quality of human nature and of nature and its restorative effects on the overly civilized and consequently diminished human spirit. Get up into the mountains and get close to God, he proclaimed, the fervor of Old Testament prophet. Yosemite Valley was sanctum sanctorum, the high Sierra country filled with warm God, a divine manuscript as revelatory of the divine as the Bible itself. Every natural object, conductor of divinity, and only by coming into contact with them may we be filled with the Holy Ghost. On the wall of my office at home, very close to my desk, small wooden plaque, famous quote from Muir: "The mountains are calling, go." I bought the plaque many years ago at the Pinkham Notch Visitors Center, heart of New Hampshire mountains, not long after we moved to England. It has long been one of my favorite quotes from Muir, since I too am drawn to the mountains on a deep spiritual level. I also appreciate how much of Muir's profound nature spirituality wrapped up in this short statement: mountains are calling, go. This one phrase reflects Muir's sense of kinship, all of nature, in haiku-like simplicity. That he hears the call of the mountains on some mystical level, feels compelled to return once again to the wilderness. It is no wonder that he earned the moniker John of the Mountain, a title that harkens back to ancient prophets and saints. Because he is famous for being an early conservationist, you would rarely hear John Muir mentioned among the notable second wave transcendentalists from the last half of the 19th century. But once you learn more about spirituality, I think he could easily be added to the list. And for anyone seeking a deeper spiritual connection to nature, especially in America, Muir has to offer. A good place to begin exploring the spirituality of John Muir is to look at a brief biographical sketch of his life. Muir was born in Dunbar, Scotland on April 21st, 1838, and died of pneumonia December 24th, 1914, at the age of 76. In 1849, at the age of 11, he immigrated to America with his family, settling in Wisconsin. In those days, Wisconsin was still on the frontier, and life on his farm was difficult and demanding. His formal schooling ended when he immigrated, but he was a determined self-learner who continued to read voraciously many subjects the pre-dawn hours before his rigorous dusk work on the farm 6 days a week. His father was very strict and sometimes abusive, and his harsh physical treatment was accompanied by a harsh Calvinist Christian theology that Muir endured, including a demand that he memorize most of the Bible. Even so, life on the frontier, with its exposure to the forest and wildlife, enthralled young, and he began to see the divine in all things around him. It was the start of a sense of animism, seeing everything in the world as a live spark that would grow in Muir through the rest of his life. Muir was mechanically gifted, a natural-born engineer who invented a variety of clever machines, labor-saving devices that drew the attention from neighbors. In 1860, with their encouragement, Muir left home to exhibit some of his inventions at State Agricultural Madison, Wisconsin, and he was invited to attend the University of Wisconsin. His 2 years of study there, he deepened his knowledge of botany, geology, including learning about Darwin's recently published work, Evolution. Most importantly, he became friends with one of his professors, Dr. Carr, who taught chemistry and history, and his wife, Jean Carr, who became Muir's longtime spiritual mentor, a woman Muir called spiritual mother. Muir often spent time in the Carr home, a place he described as filled with books, kindliness, and patience. Jean Carr was a New Englander from Vermont who had met Emerson and became a convert to Unitarianism. She introduced Muir to the principal transcendentalist writers. Never looked back. In 1863, Muir decided to leave the university, and that summer he went on a botanical excursion on the Wisconsin River. As Tim Flinders writes in the book I read from this morning, Muir had arrived in Madison a pious and dutiful Calvinist, abstemious in his habits and evangelical in his Christian zeal. He left with a more cosmic, less biblical understanding of God's nature. I suspect many youths today can relate to his religious evolution as a young adult. I certainly do. As the Civil War raged on in the East, draft was introduced to supply the increasing need for Union soldiers to carnage. John Muir and his brother Dan, both avowed pacifists who saw only futility in war, decided to travel to Ontario. They remained beyond the war. In 1867, Muir returned to Indianapolis, and with his mechanical engineering skills, he soon found a lucrative job in a carriage plant. Lured by his material success, he writes about his passion for mechanical engineering, and he assumes he has found his life calling. Fortunately, all of us who have benefited from Muir's later legacy He suffered an accident at the factory when a file he was using broke off and a fragment had blinded him in the eye. After recovering for several months, he realizes that he almost lost his capacity to nature, and he decides to embark on an epic 1,000-mile walk to Louisville, Kentucky to Cherokee, Florida in October. This begins a period of travel and extended time in nature that transformed Muir into the wilderness sage and environmental activist today. To us, he is most famous for his advocacy to establish Yosemite National Park, for co-founding the Sierra Club, first organizations focused on conservation, and for his extensive nature writing. But it is impossible to truly understand any of these aspects of life without understanding deep nature drove him to action. Time limits me from going into all the fascinating his life that followed, but there are a few more key moments that are important if you look at his spiritual journey. After a bout of malaria at the end of 1867, Muir sailed to Cuba, New York, and then arrives in March of 1868 in San Francisco. He worked his way into the Sierra foothills as a ferryman, a shearer, and a handyman, and is eventually becoming a shepherd for a herd of 2,000 sheep that he accompanied high into the Sierras north of Yosemite Valley. He became enthralled with Yosemite Valley and ends up building a cabin there and working at a small sawmill at the base of Yosemite Falls through 1801. With his keen knowledge of the natural history of Yosemite, gained through careful observations and outings, Muir becomes a regular hired guide for visiting tourists and eventually quits his job at the mill. One of his visitors was Ralph Waldo Emerson, introduced to him by Gene Carr. It was an occasion that Muir described as one of the two supreme moments of life. The other incident was his discovery of an extremely rare calypso orchid along a stream in Canada. Pretty high praise from a man who lived such a long and extraordinary life. In December 1870, during one of his many excursions, Muir discovered Lyell Glacier in Yosemite. The following year, he published his first article on Yosemite glaciers, beginning a long writing career that would last the rest of his life. After writing several articles in the years that followed, Muir discovered he had a talent for it. This begins a long personal struggle between his need to travel and to be in the wilderness, the reality of needing to be in civilization to advance his writing career. After his marriage to Louise Strentzel in 1880, he is further torn by his desire for a normal family life as well, and he takes a hiatus from traveling and writing to manage the family farm and raise the family between 1888. All of the wild is strong, though, and after a trip to Mount Rainier in 1888, he begins to write and travel again, including a proposal for Yosemite Park. By 1892, he retires from farming and becomes the first president of the Sierra Club. After accompanying President Theodore Roosevelt on a camping trip to Yosemite in 1903, he persuaded the president to create Yosemite National Park, and it becomes federally protected in 1906. Advocacy continues for Grand Canyon National Park, which is established in 1908, but he is unsuccessful in protecting Hetch Hetchy Valley for Yosemite, which was dammed to create a reservoir. Losing Hetch Hetchy to development remained one of the greatest disappointments of life. A legend in his own time, Muir left behind a legacy of protecting wilderness, environmental advocacy that continues to today, and numerous books and articles about his travels in nature that still captivate readers. Though he wrote in prose, his writing seems at times to evoke the sacred, like the poetry of the recent decades. A growing interest in spirituality that motivated Muir has revealed him to be a fascinating spiritual thing as well. I'm not sure when I first became aware of Muir, but it was sometime in the 1980s when I really began to go hiking and backpacking regularly. And when I first became involved in a variety of conservation and environmental groups, especially the Sierra Club. Like most people, I first encountered Muir as the naturalist, conservationist, environmental activist. And in all fairness, most of his published works focused on the beauty and wonders of nature, part of his desire to spend time in the wild to gain support preserving the wilderness remained. Such works, Muir stepped back, brink of explicitly spiritual writing, offering a more romantic, Victorian style emphasis on beauty. Other writings were more scientific, especially his observations of theories about glaciation proved to be true. Most of what we now know about his spirituality is found either in short passages in nature travel books or from his extensive correspondence, which often included lengthy discussions about his emerging pantheistic theology, seeing the divine in all things, all life, even the stones. As I started reading Muir's writings and biographies about him, I soon learned that I had literally crossed paths with Muir about 120 apart during one of my section hikes on the Georgia Appalachian Trail at a gap. This gap in the Blue Ridge Mountains, where the old Logan Turnpike once crossed through the mountains to Piedmont, is where in 1867, at the age of 29, Muir walked on the turnpike in the famous Thousand Mile, Florida. He describes the area in his detailed journal from that adventure that was published posthumously, Thousand Mile Walk to the Gulf. I have been back to Tennessee Gap many times over the years, and I always think about this intersection of my walk and Muir's when I'm there. Like Muir, the more time I spent in nature, the more I became attuned to the spiritual feelings nature evoked. And the more I began to truly appreciate the inseparable human nature bond and the interdependent web of life. This made me want to read more writings by Muir and other notable authors who had the gift of being able to convey their mystical wild in words, which is no mean feat for anyone who's experienced. My reading just made me want to spend more time in the wilderness. It became a kind of feedback loop that deepened my nature spirituality. Muir remains one of my favorites. He has been an important influence on my spiritual journey. I'm sure some of you may have similar stories you could share about your own encounter with Muir. Emerson has sometimes been called an armchair naturalist because he spoke from a mostly intellectual perspective compared to someone like Muir or Thoreau, who tried to express the ineffable nature spirituality that comes from direct. Thoreau was an adventurer in his own right, but it's safe to say that Muir took it to a whole nother level. To call him an ultralight hiker would be an understatement. Muir was known to stuff some bread and tea in his coat pocket, tin cup, and head up the hills, often camping out without so much blanket. Sometimes he came close to perishing on such trips, but the harsh conditions of childhood likely prepared him for the privation, difficulties encountered. Or perhaps, like you see in the legends of some of the ancient sages, he just lived on faith, providence. Like sages and prophets of traditions have famously done for millennia, Muir headed into the wild places both to explore the physical landscape around him and to explore the interior landscape of the soul. Though he often used the traditional Christian language of his birth to express his encounters with the divine, he was a mystic. Spirituality transcended the boundaries of tradition into something more universal, a mark of mystics of all stripes through the ages. For Muir, every trip, pilgrimage, and he revered the event there and appreciated formative power. As he said in another famous quote, between every two pine trees, or Muir's writings are the sentiments of the transcendentalist who saw nature as sacred and revelatory of the divine as much or more than Scripture. Muir wrote to Jean Carr in 1874, here were miles and miles of tree scripture along the sky. A Bible that will be read. The beauty of his letters and sentences burned me like fire all this year. The other common spiritual theme you see in Muir's writing is the unity of the cosmos, single divine order. Responding to a friend from Indianapolis, for example, Muir wrote, rocks and waters, etc., are words of God, and so are men. We all flow from one fountain soul, all our expressions, love. He never abandoned the animism, pantheism he discovered as a young man in the woods of Wisconsin. If Muir were alive today, I'd like to think he would find a comfortable spiritual home, one of our Unitarian Universalist congregations. But I doubt you would see him in church very often. More likely, you might catch him out on the trail on his latest pilgrimage to the wild places. He's one of those fascinating people on my short list of folks I would love to have met. If it turns out there really is an afterlife, I will be sure to look him up. Fortunately, he left us a wealth of books and spiritual thoughts to explore. We are drawn to deepen our spiritual nature and our place within it. If you want to climb high into the mountains and enjoy a view from some exposed craggy peak, or if you want to shinny up a tree and ride out a thunderstorm, and feel the awesome display of nature's power firsthand, I say go for it. But if you don't have to do that in order to appreciate what Muir was trying to say. Even the gentler nature found all around us offers herself to us. I believe Muir's writing is best read outdoors. So this immediate reality in arms won't be long until the weather warms. It will be easier to answer. Next chance I have, I think I will take along something by Muir and read it in a wild place. Embraces presence, nourishes. Our closing hymn, 355, we lift our
We lift our hearts in thanks today for all the gifts of life, and first for peace that turns away the enmity.
Our closing words come from John Muir. Every morning, my whole being seems at once to feel like a sponge in the ardent life current about us, filling all the world. Tree and stone, even manifest radiant life and enjoyment, and seems to shout, "Awake, awake, come to me in my song, learn my lesson, enjoy my beauty, love us, come, come." These are moments when everything seems equal to mine, as if melted in one glowing fire, heaven's love.
Please join me in reading the word extinguishing. We extinguish this flame, not the light of truth, warmth, or the fire of these we carry in our hearts till we are together again.